Hello, Cinnabar Moths, or any kind of moth you'd like to be. Welcome to the Writer's Triangle Cinnabar Moths podcast about all things publishing and books. Today we are here with Katie Groom, author of the Cardinal Moon Saga. Katie, hi, how are you doing today?
I am doing awesome. I'm super excited to be here.
I'm super excited to be talking with you today. And are you feeling excited about the release of of Rising Moon, which is the third book in the Cardinal Moon Saga in the series?
Yes, I'm super excited. I will admit that while writing it, it was very kind of sad for me a little bit to put an end to Hugh and Zoe's story, but I'm super excited that it's finally out there. And then also for, people that are like, oh, I want the whole series to be there before I read, that's exciting for them too. So yeah, I'm super excited about it.
That's wonderful to hear. What are you most looking forward to with the release, and do you have anything special planned, or what's going on with that?
So the release is actually on the same day that like I start a new part of my job and everything like that. So I'm celebrating a lot of stuff all at once. Am I celebrating anything special? No, not necessarily, but I am looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to being able to say that like I've really completed a big project, like something that is above and beyond what I ever really thought I could achieve, and that also is, just something that's just I always dreamed of achieving. So like it's kind of been like a dream come true, I guess, So I'm just looking forward to being able to be like, oh my gosh, I actually finished a trilogy, when at one point I was like, am I ever going to finish even one book? That kind of thing.
Right, yeah. I can imagine the difference in the experience too of first setting yourself down, be like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna try to write this first book. I don't know if I'll make it through, but I'm gonna at least try to do it, right? And then
Hmm.
you get through it, and now here you are, 3 books later.
I know, and then all these little short stories that go with it too. Like it's really a saga, and like there's just so many little pieces, and there's so much more that could be written if I really wanted to sit down and do it, and if I wanted to, that kind of thing. There's just, but like to have written the final book in this particular series, I get to put a bow on it or a pin in it, but the knowing me, like the bow wasn't easily achieved for these characters.
Yeah, it's always kind of a mixed feeling. So I want to ask you, would you say it was easier or harder writing this completion of sorts of Hugh and Zoe's stories than the previous books?
Emotionally, it was a lot harder, actually. Like I've said it before, like Hugh and Zoe have really been there for me in some really difficult, dark times in my life. When you know, Hugh became like a character that I created. We talked, I think in our last one, we talked about how like I just love Hugh, so I'm not allowed to, say he's my favorite character or anything anymore. But he was there for me in a very, very difficult time in my life. And I actually feel like I might have gone through a grieving process as I was writing this final book, knowing that when I was done with this, yes, his story could go on. He's immortal, right? But the main part of his story, him and Zoe, their story, and yes, they're immortal. It could go on, but this part of their story is done. And I had to kind of grieve that a little bit as I was doing it. And it was really hard for me to do it because I'm like, if you finish this book, if you write these words, Katie, you're done writing about Hugh and you have to move on to other projects. you know, you you have to find other things to like kind of do, that kind of thing. You have to come up with other ideas,
Right.
that kind of. So it was hard in that aspect. Writing the first book was difficult because I really didn't know what I was doing at all. But as it was that first book, Fixed Moon, was difficult in the aspect that like I didn't know what I was doing. Like I needed, assistance and feedback and things like that. But it's gone pretty smoothly from there. I would think. And you also, when you're doing something for the first time, you don't know what to expect. And now I'm like, okay, I've written it. It's going to go to the editor. The editor's going to get it back to me. I'm going to read through all of the grammar mistakes that I made and
Yeah.
probably approve everything. And then, from there, we're going to talk about making the cover, and then we'll do, the media part of it, so a little bit more what to expect and what the timing's going to be and things like that. But I would say emotionally, physically writing the book was probably harder for Fixed Moon. Gibbous Moon was like ridiculously easy for me to write because I was just like, I really want to use this to get to this scene. Like it was the easiest of the three. And then this one was emotionally, just me not wanting to let go, that kind of
Mm.
thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There is sort of that process of knowing you're putting down characters that you spent so long with, right? Because you spent the time
Hmm.
getting to really know them during the writing process and to explore their identities. And oftentimes, like you mentioned, your writing, you've connected with your characters and they've helped you to go through times in your life. And so they're not alive, but it's still this deep connection to a chapter of sorts in your own real life that they've been through.
Yeah, they're like a piece of me, really. There's a lot of things about Hugh and Zoe that are very similar to me and as a person, and things that I'm into, like, or since we're talking about the third book, like in the first book, I can say, spoilers for Fixed Moon, but Hugh goes through, a really bad depression and stuff like that. And that's something that I'd gone through, where I struggled to get, out of bed, to brush my teeth at times, things like that, those things that most people are like, I mean, when they hear that, they're gonna be like, ew, girl. But like, it's real, those kind of, like, I mean, I think Hugh went weeks without brushing his hair. I'm sure I've done that, when I'm going through some dark times and stuff. So yeah, they're really a part of me. Like, I put a lot into them. Um, and that's why I really do hope that people can connect with the characters, a little bit. So yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. And speaking of characters, without
Mhm.
necessarily, any spoilers or anything, are there any new characters that you're particularly excited for the readers to meet? Any new people aside from, the ones that we know of, Hugh and Zoe are your beloved two main characters, but who else is there?
So, there's these two sisters that are witches named Mitzi and Meadow, who I absolutely love, and that are actually, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so embarrassing. They're actually based off of two Dolphies that I have. That like I like their likeness, like the way they look and everything is really, Meadow has this long down to the floor hair that just drags, when she walks and stuff. And the Dolphy has hair like that. And that's actually the names of those two Dolphys too. So, not even ashamed. But Mitzi and Meadow, I love. They play a major role in everything that goes on, even though they're not in the book very much. And then um, and I am going to mispronounce my own character's name because I'm not really great at Irish stuff. But it her the her this character, her name is spelled Beag um, En. I had to actually think about that for a minute. That's horrible. But it's kind of pronounced Bogan, but I will call her Vegan probably. She is a little fairy. She's adorable. Um, her hair makes the sound of chimes when she walks and stuff, and she plays a major role. And she changes Hugh's view on many things, on what he would even ask someone to do. Even if he needed something as a favor, there's certain things that he just won't ask people to do anymore. After, some of the things that she does for him. Those probably are my three favorite, of the new characters, that, and they all have such a rich history that we don't get to talk about very much, but I know it, that kind of thing. But I hope that everyone enjoys them. And there's also like one character that's in it very briefly named Drusus, and I just picture like Andy Serkis playing this character if we ever make these into movies. I don't know.
So it sounds to me like there's quite a few new characters that come into play that you've developed, strong bonds with as well, that you're excited for the readers to read about. And I'm sure the readers hearing this, your fans who have been following the series, will be, excited as well to hear, ooh, more characters to fall in love with, right?
Yep. Even the bad ones, the grumpy ones are great, that you can fall in love with them.
You can definitely enjoy sort of the negative Nellies, or even the villains sometimes in stories can be enjoyable for their own, for what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to talk a little bit more about that with villains and with kind of the exploration of, you mentioned immortality for Hugh and Zoe, right? In the series, you play with that concept of immortals, immortality, and sort of how do you get back at somebody who is immortal, right? And that concept of immortality not being invulnerability. What drew you to exploring this concept?
Well, to me, nothing's more irritating than having a main character that just can't die. Like, it's like, what's the point at this point? And I just kind of, there has to be a way to punish someone. There has to be not even Achilles had, his Achilles heel, that kind of thing. There is a way, just because someone's immortal. I mean, even in like what was it, Highlander. I used to watch that television show with my dad back in the 90s. But like and then there's also a series of movies and stuff like that. But even in Highlander, there is a way, just because they're immortal, they can die. Their immortal life can end. Just because their mortal life has ended and they've become immortal doesn't mean there isn't a way to end their life, or isn't a way to entrap them or something like that. And I just nothing's if there's no way to punish them or for them to lose the fight, or if there's no risk involved, then like really what's the point of the story, is kind of where I kind of came from that, because it would just be okay, they can live forever and do whatever, but what are the stakes here, and for me, um, and I'm overly cautious in my real life because, I don't want to, I've got plenty of life left to live, so I guess I think to myself, my biggest fear is, you know, dying too early and not getting to accomplish the things that I wanted to accomplish, and that and heights and spiders. But anyways, I just, that's kind of a thing, for me. And then also, if they are fully immortal and can never die, then like they'll be in power forever if nobody does anything about it, that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, I hope I answered that question. I just kind of got long-winded and went off on my own with it, but yeah.
I definitely think that you answered it in talking about the necessity for there to be some type of risk, right? Even with being immortal, there are things that you can lose that you value and
Mm-hmm.
cherish. And those things don't always have to be people or even physical objects. It can be a concept like freedom, the freedom of choice,
Yep.
or the power to do the things that you wish to do. Things of that nature that are still tied into your value and your life as long as it
Yeah.
is when you're immortal, right?
Right. Like, I mean, because I don't want to go too far. Like, I'm always afraid. I hate spoilers, so I'm always afraid of going too deep with it. But like, yeah, like there's basically one role that in every single story about immortals, that there's basically one rule. Like, don't let these mortals know. Like, let's keep them like keep it secret, keep it safe, kind of situation, but in this story in particular, we find out that the powers, the people that are in power are just like, you know what? I don't like the way this guy breathed at me, so I'm just gonna punish him for that, and they're just so egregious with it. They're just so
Right.
ridiculous with it, and if they can't get away with, Hugh's very powerful. I mean, that's been said throughout the entire series. They do fear him a little bit. He's kind of, he's like a big dude. He has ripped people apart. I mean, let's be real. I mean, that's in like the first book. He's ripped someone apart from limb to limb, and they're a little bit afraid of that. So if they can't fight him, what are they going to do to get back at him, kind of thing, that kind of thing. And I guess, yeah, there's ways for them to get through that. And I just, it all started really with, I just don't want, them to be infallible, kind of thing.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
makes sense. Having tension in the story is part of what draws us to stories, right? Is the conflict and
Right.
how do people resolve their tension? How do people achieve their goals, especially if their goal is i- punish somebody who can't die?
Yep. Yep.
How am I going to get back at this person who I can't necessarily overpower and is also immortal?
So yeah,
Right.
so I'll just make his immortal life miserable. So,
Right. And that's something that was explored in a bit in the previous book as well, in Gibbous Moon, with events that happen, I guess without being too spoilery, just with uh, the losses that Hugh experienced and kind of how that came about and was expressed throughout the story. And then as we move forward with Rising Moon, we follow Hugh's path in getting justice for the events that happened in the previous books and getting his revenge against the Council of the Immortal. And we get to explore Zoe learning more about her witchcraft and her magic. In this deeper exploration of the magic and, the immortality and, I guess in a sense, the mythos of the world that we're in, what are some of the inspirations that you drew from to make the magic system and to come up with the structure that exists?
so when it came to this, I actually, like, when I first started, doing this, believe it or not, like, if people think, okay, so if you're writing historical fiction, there's obviously going to be a lot of research that goes into that because you want to make sure that it's, you're not saying, during the Civil War of 1776 in the United States. I mean, that's completely inaccurate, right? So you want to make sure that things line up. But like, you wouldn't think that in like paranormal or fantasy, like these are made up things anyways. How much research do you have to do? You actually do have to do quite a bit of research to make
Right.
sure that, your magic systems make sense because you want to, you want to make sure. And again, I mean, and I'm saying you, and I guess I shouldn't, I wanted to make sure that, they weren't infallible, that they weren't completely invulnerable. So I did, research on like the different kinds of magic and what, if she gives something, does she, if she does take magic, like use magic, does it take something from her? Does she need to recharge? Things like that, and what I decided was, the sun gives power to, if she's a sun witch, or the moon, or water, just depending on what, gives them power. I guess Silas is a great example because he pulls from the shadows. So if he's in the middle of the desert and there's no shadows, what's he gonna do?
Right.
But you can kind of find a way, and he, when he in Gibbous Moon, he teaches Zoe, like, find a way, so there's no sunshine right now, but what light can you pull from, that kind of stuff. um and their, photosynthesis is within the plants because, and they pull that from the sun, that kind of stuff, and so I just kind of did a lot of research with that, but also with, the justice towards the council. And without going too far into it, but we've known for books, for both the previous books, that they do trap people in gargoyle form as a prison. And I thought to myself, as a gargoyle, like, and we don't have a lot. Maybe we have more than I think, but we don't have a lot of stories about gargoyles. So I had a lot of freedom here, you know. Um,
Mhm.
And I thought to myself, okay, you're in this gargoyle form, you're in the dark. And I just started like, what would that be like, and that kind of stuff. And a lot of the inspiration behind the gargoyles and putting them in this prison, this dark prison, I thought about people are in prison for some ridiculous reasons, that non-violent crimes that you just really shouldn't. There should be another way, and it got to thinking about that kind of stuff. That's really where I drew my inspiration for this. Is like, if you're sitting here for 100 years because you're immortal, you're going to be sitting there. You have no way to, you know, keep time. You don't know. Time is nothing, because time, I mean, is relative, like, to what's going on. I mean, think about it when we're in, and I'm rambling here, but like when we're kids, summer seemed so long for those of us that didn't go to school in the summer. Summer seemed so long, but now it's a blink of the eye. And when you think about, memories, so time's really relative. And I just started exploring that kind of stuff. And even though, we don't know all of these thousands upon thousands of, immortal creatures that have been encapsulated in these gargoyle forms, like, they all have a story. They've all been sitting there. They're all like, man, all I did was fall in love with a mortal. Like, what? Why am I shoved in here like this? That kind of thing. And I mean, I do think I've rambled now, but like, my inspiration behind all of that is like, there are people sitting in prison who's like, I just had some weed on me. Is it really that big of a deal?
Mhm.
Whereas this other guy, he knows the right people, he has money, and he's powerful, and he has done some horrible things, and he paid, and he has maybe really hurt somebody, really ruined someone's life, and he knows the right people, so he's out there walking around, and is that fair? And
Right.
that's really where this stuff came from.
That makes a lot of sense in terms of, having to do a lot of research to explore magic systems and to make sure that your stuff is coherent and makes sense and doesn't necessarily draw from something and then become too different to where it's not recognizable from its source material in a way, right? Because we reference
Yeah.
pixies or fairies or witchcraft. If we make it not witchcraft while doing witchcraft, what's the point in calling it witchcraft at that point, right?
Right. And then, like, with even like with Hugh, I had to think about the fact that, like, as a werewolf, and he's really a shapeshifter, let's be honest, but we call it a werewolf.
Mm,
But like, because he can't shape shift into what, it's not transfiguration, like, it's, you know, it, I had to think about the fact I really don't want him to be bitten to have this. He has a scar and everything like that, but that scar isn't because he was scratched by a werewolf, and he doesn't change with the moon, and I had to create all that stuff, and I was like, but is it too far removed? No, because he's a giant wolf, so,
right.
but I just wanted to, you know, I, does a silver bullet harm him? No, but, is it too far removed, kind of thing? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's that range, right, where we're close enough to it, but we have our own room for creativity, and that's kind of the beauty of it, is being able to have this shared reference point of a werewolf or of witchcraft or of other creatures and things that exist within
Yeah.
a lot of different lore. And then we go, but here's my spin on it. Here's my take on it. And and so with that, I want to ask you as well, with the variety of different mythos that you reach from to create the Council of the Immortal, to create the different entities that exist and that we end up meeting throughout the story. What are you most excited about the fans being able to experience in Rising Moon?
Oh, see, this is hard because I don't want to give spoilers, but there's just a couple characters, like, that from book one you have hated. I mean, it probably, like, there are some characters that have done done Hugh and Zoe real dirty,
Right.
Stevie, for one, um, Zoe's mother, that kind
Mhm.
of thing. But I'm excited that they become important still in these books. They're important, and some of the things, the choices that they make affect other things, and um, I'm excited about that. I'm excited about fans getting to know some new characters that I mentioned earlier. I'm very excited that some of the stuff that happened even that is mentioned in Fixed Moon, but happened pre-Fixed Moon, as you're learning, the background for Hugh and his experience with Alvin and stuff. Like, some of these things are going to come around and connect again, and you're going to see, like, these aren't just little things that I mentioned and forgot about. They come back, that kind of thing. So I'm excited to see that the fans are going to get to see um, those things come back and make sense, because you might be like, well, why did we even mention that? Like, who, they make sense now, that kind of thing.
Right.
But also, I'm excited for fans to get to read the entire saga at this point. Something silly is, all the books are the same height, guys. So y'all are gonna love that. For those of you who are like, oh, I hate when books are different sizes in series, and they're all cohesive, like with the way the color scheme for all the books, goes through, those little things that people, maybe just me, I don't know, but all those things. But I am excited. Those are just little, silly things. But I'm excited for everyone to get to see that ending, and that it's come full circle, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I can say, as a fellow reader, I do enjoy when a series of books, the books are the same size, because then and the art makes sense together, right?
Yes.
Because maybe you and I are kind of similar in this way, but if I have a series of books, I want them to look neat together.
Yep. Yep. Like, I have everyone knows that I love the Twilight Saga, and I have some of those in hardback and some in paperback, and I can't get them all in the same, I can't find them anymore, and they're not the same height. And then also, there's a novella that she wrote in there, The Short Second Life of Bree Tanner. And she was done dirty in that series as well, I just want to say. But and I'll get off my soapbox, but that's not the same height as the rest of the books. And I'm like, come on, girl. Like, word, fix it,
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
And so you mentioned a little bit that there's events and there's kind of nods back to events and things that you mentioned in the previous books. And so are there any Easter egg surprises that you can hint at for the fans, or are they all a little too spoilery?
I think it's nice that they go back to Pittsburgh a little bit. Because as I think Give a Spoon might have been the first book I ever wrote that didn't have a Pittsburgh reference in it. So you do get a little bit of a Pittsburgh reference. I do think it's neat that, you meet Mitzi and Meadow, and there is a little bit of an Easter egg back to something that happened that really was the catalyst for the entire story. And all the way going back to, it's the whole reason that Al then was like, I'm gonna throw this beer on you at this fireworks thing here at the Vulcan. Because but there's something that kind of ties into that. And we get to meet somebody from Zoe's past that um, really, she has didn't have a real opportunity to get that closure with. And I think that is probably one of the one of my favorite things about that, about the story, that she does get that closure.
That's awesome to hear that Zoe gets to experience some closure with different characters, and that for the avid fans in Pittsburgh, that there'll be more Pittsburgh references.
Also, oh, and one more thing, like they do get to go back to Scotland. You know, Zoe never got to see where he was from, and Hugh does get to go for a moment back to Scotland. And I think, you know, that's not a spoiler. Just saying it isn't a spoiler, but they do get to go back to Scotland. And that was such a big part of his life, and where he came from and what and stuff. So it's nice to see that too.
Yeah, I think that does sound great. And with this, with this third book in the Cardinal Moon saga, we wrap up the series of Hugh and Zoe's experiences and their story, right? Their life continues because they're immortal and everything, but their story has now ended with the book. Now that you're on the other side of this series, what are some takeaways that you have from the experience?
Oh, that I can do it.
That's a good
um,
takeaway.
that you know, that and I took a break afterwards after writing it too, because it was such it was a big undertaking. But you know, I just think, you know, I think takeaways, things like, yeah, I can do it. You, I planned, when I wrote, Fixed Moon, I think at first I thought it was going to be a standalone, and then it started to become a trilogy. And you know, I think one of my takeaways is that, like, as a pantser, someone that like flies by the seat of my pants for most of the writing process, you do have to think about things in the future, you know, like, you know, that kind of thing. Like you do have to think about, like, how is this going to affect, that, and you know, affect this and this and this. And actually, one of the key, you know, I guess spoilers again for Fixed Moon and Gibbous Moon, you know, Zoe, and we've talked about her the whole way through. Zoe's not dead, guys. You know, and we had to leave it open. You know, I had to learn, like, you can't give that away. Like, I'm like, oh, a cliffhanger. They're like, less of a cliffhanger. You need to let it be a cliffhanger, you know, that kind of thing. And then, but you can have a cliffhanger and not have a cliffhanger at the same time, you know, that kind of stuff. You know, just some learning, you know, but key takeaways is, like, you do have to plan a little bit. You can't just right by the seat of your pants, and you know, that kind of thing. And it works for some people, but it wouldn't work for me. But yeah, I guess that, and that my key takeaways, wow, you can actually do this. Like, your entire life you just wanted to be a published author, you just wanted one book published, and now you have three. Like, you really did that. You did this. You really did this. And you had an idea that became way bigger than you ever thought it would be. You know, that's I think my biggest takeaway is that, like, I can actually do it. So yeah.
I think that's a wonderful set of takeaways, and the important one of you can do it, I think, is an awesome takeaway to take into your future writing, right? Because this will give you the confidence to explore your ideas more.
Yes.
And so, has this process changed you as a writer, aside from the confidence?
Yes. And like, as for confidence, I mean, it's not like, confidence is like a wave, you know. Sometimes I have it, sometimes I don't, like, you know, but yes, this process is like, I am just definitely a better writer. I'm not for everyone. I'm not going to pretend that I'm like the best writer in the world, or you know, anything like that. And I'm definitely not for everybody, and I'm okay. I mean, I'll never forget the first bad review that I got. Is still one of my favorites. It's all rom, no com, and I was like, yeah, I love that. Um, you know, but has this process changed me as a writer? Yeah, because before this, I had taken a long time off writing before I had started writing the trilogy. I got back into it because my husband at the time had made a really negative comment about me and my writing, and I thought, well, I'll show you. But
Hmm.
anyways, from that. But also previous to that, I had just written a lot of fan fiction and written on message boards and written little pieces at a time. And I had written some really coherent stories, but I'm just, I know, you know, I know the come on, Katie, like the beats of a story now. Like, you at 30% of the story, you want to have this kind of thing hit. I know the makeup, like you don't want to, not every story is the same, but there are certain things. It's kind of like writing a song, after so many, you have the bridge, the chorus, like that kind of stuff. So
Right.
yeah, it is. I know the elements of a story now, and I know that better. And I mean, I think I talked about this a little bit earlier. Like when I wrote Fixed Moon, I was clueless. I mean, like I was like, here's a story, here you go, read it, tell me what you think, And it was like, we need you to rewrite 20,000 words of this in a week, and I'm like, yeah, I can do that. I'll just take time off of work. But now, I know the process and I know how it feels, and I'm like, okay, we're getting to 30% of this. I need to have like a big inciting moment, like,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. There's acts one, two, three, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I kind of know a little bit better. I also know what works for me and what doesn't. Like I love developing my characters, not fully because they develop themselves throughout the story, but like there has to be a base of these characters, and I actually do that in a notebook. Like I hand write out, okay, we've got Zoe, she looks like this, this is where she aligns in magic, here's some things that happened to her in her childhood that make her who she is. Like, so I develop my characters, this is why I know what their favorite kind of ice cream is, that kind of stuff, you know um that kind of stuff. So there's kind of, you know, I know that that works for me. And I also know that typing the story part actually works best for me. And because my hand will start hurting if I try to handwrite the whole thing, so I know that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And I know also I need to not focus on the number of words. Early on, I would do that, and I found out no, it's about taking the time to write a little bit each day, whether that's 100 words or 10,000. You just need to take the time to write. And then also, I know that if I've got, I'm approaching burnout, I need to take a break. So yeah, it changed me as a writer? Yes, and probably as a person too, a little bit. So yeah.
I think that's wonderful to hear that you've made this growth across the experience in terms of your approach to writing and learning more about the craft and everything. I think that's wonderful to hear. And and from this experience that you've had of writing a trilogy and writing this whole saga of the Cardinal Moon, do you have advice for other authors who might be planning to write a story that spans multiple novels or novels plus short stories?
Um, so yeah, you kind of have to make sure you reference your older books too. Like, so, like you need to plan a little bit, but also like I have reread Fixed Moon a, a million times because I'm like, wait a minute, did there was like a moment in Gibbous Moon too where I was like, did I actually put that in there? Like, and I was like, oh my god, I gotta go back and see, and I'm like flipping through the pages and stuff.
Mm,
I'm like, where was this at in the story? So not only do you have to plan for the future, but you have to remember what you've written in the past. And there's my brother-in-law, he reads a series, I can't remember what it's called, but there's like 17 books in this series already, and he's like, wait a minute, I need to this other book because I'm telling you, this author said, so you have to kind of keep track.
right.
But also, I wrote a trilogy, and in each book there's, act one, act two, act three, but each book is, Fixed Moon is act one, act two is Gibbous Moon, act three, so you really have to know the structure of the story and stuff like that, and things like that. And then I wrote some short stories, and I had to make sure they made sense in the time period that they were taking part of, um, and things like that. So you just, I would say, if you are an author who wants to write a story that spans multiple novels, find what way organizes you and make sure that you're organized there because it needs to be a cohesive story. Even if it's a trilogy, like I read stories now where, you've got the main, you know, main characters in this story, and then when you go to this other one, these main characters were part of this other story. So you have to make sure that it makes sense with the timeline and stuff. So there's a lot of organizational pieces that go into that. So make sure that I guess my biggest piece of advice is make sure that you're organized so that you know what you're doing and you're making sense throughout the entire story.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, and that's something that I remember I struggled with just writing one book, let alone a series, is making sure that it was internally cohesive.
Yep.
The it's really easy to forget a piece of something that you said, 10,000 words ago, or however
Mhm.
long ago that you actually wrote those 10,000 words, and make sure that you still have something that makes sense within itself. And so I can only imagine the difficulty of across years with the first book in the series to now, in trying to remember all that is a challenge. So having some way to organize and keep track of it is really good advice.
Well, yeah, and like even like if you think about it, so I started writing Fixed Moon, which originally was called My Future Imperfect, which became Quicksilver, which became the book formerly known as Quicksilver, which became Fixed Moon. I started writing all of that, and those are all like old Twitter jokes between me and Christopher. Anyways, I started writing this in 2019, I think, so I have to remember. And then the story completely has changed. I mean, it originally took place, I think, I think that Hugh wasn't even Scottish when I originally started this. So like there's so much that has changed, and I'm like, wait a minute, did I end up putting that in there or didn't I? Like there was something that I had once written about the time in Nightbrook and the way that it progresses, and then I'm like, wait a minute, but that wouldn't work, so like I'm like, that's a plot hole, and like so I had to take it out, so yeah, there's, I would say, organization, like, because the things that are sometimes, there are things that I don't even remember writing in Rising Moon, and it's only been a couple months. So yeah, definitely organization and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely great advice for anybody who's listening who's looking for advice for this type of thing. And then aside from that, I'd like to say that I'm personally really excited for the release of Rising Moon, and I know that your fans are as well. And I want to thank you, Katie, for coming on and talking to me today and being on the Writer's Triangle.
Of course.
And for all our beautiful moths, thank you for listening. Be sure to buy Rising Moon, coming out September 3rd, 2024. Katie, can you tell us where we can find you? Social media?
Oh yeah, so I have a website, uh, katiegroomwrites.com, and that actually has links for all the books, and then also for the short stories and everything. So like you can find, there's a link on there for, so you can find, Cold Christmas and the Darkest of Winters, which has Cardinal Moon in it. And then links to each one of the e-zines that has the short stories, and those are all free. So like that way people can get that little supplemental stuff to know a little bit more about the stories. And then I have an Instagram, which is XOXO___ Katie, Katie, underscore. And then I do have my Goodreads, which is Katie Groom Writes. And I can be found on any one of those.
That's wonderful to hear. And for everybody listening, please be sure to visit cinnabarmouth.com where you can check out the transcripts, and we'll also have the link to Katie's social media. Katie, once again, thank you for coming on and talking today. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And for all of our listeners, thank you for listening. And for now, bye-bye.